The desperate cry for mercy that unleashed humanity's fury. Part 1: The Signal. The paperwork was the worst part. Nate Calloway had fought in 2 wars, survived a decompression event that took 3 of his fingers and gave them back to him via a surgeon with very small tools and very steady hands, and spent 11 years in deep space doing the kind of work that did not make it into the recruitment posters. None of that compared to the paperwork. He was sitting at his desk in the small, dim office off the bridge of the Arden Cross, staring at a fuel expenditure report when the sound came through the ship speakers. It was not supposed to come through the speakers. It was supposed to route to Dr. Lena Farrow's signal bay, get filtered, get analyzed, get wrapped in a clinical report with numbered subsections, and sent to Earth Command in a format that made it feel manageable. That was the protocol. That was how it was supposed to work. Instead, it came through every speaker on the ship at once, and for a moment, nobody moved. Nate did not move. In the rec room down the corridor, Lieutenant Kara Voss had been holding a hand of cards so bad she had been privately considering just laying them face up on the table and walking out. She did not move. Corporal Eli Prout, across from her, had been about to say something that would have made her throw something at him. He forgot what it was. The sound was not like anything. That was the first problem with it. Every sound a person hears in their life gets filed next to something else. Thunder goes next to drums, a baby crying goes next to an animal in pain, a machine breaking goes next to a branch snapping. The brain sorts. The brain files. The brain says, I know what that is. The brain had nothing to say about this. It was low in some places and very high in others. It folded over itself. It stopped and started and stopped again, in a way that had no rhythm but felt like it should. It was not music. It was not language. It was not any kind of signal Nate had heard in 11 years of deep space work. It lasted 47 seconds. Then it stopped. The ship was very quiet. Nate put down his pen. He walked to the signal bay. Lena was already there. She had been there the whole time. It was her job to monitor incoming signals, and she had been sitting at her station, eating cold rice from a container when the sound had come through her headphones first before it hit the speakers. She had routed it to the ship system without thinking. She did not know why she did that. She could not explain it later. Something in her head wanted everyone to hear it at the same time. She was sitting with both hands flat on the desk. Her rice was on the floor. She had not noticed she dropped it. Nate stood in the doorway. He looked at her. She said, "Play it again." He did not ask questions. He went and found Kara and Eli and told them to come. They all stood in the signal bay and played it again and again. Eli's face did something complicated on the second listen. Kara went very still, the way she went still when she was working a problem that did not have a good answer. Then Lena said, "Everyone out. I need to work." For 6 hours she worked. Kara brought her coffee at the 2-hour mark. Lena did not drink it. Eli came by at hour 4 and stood in the doorway and watched her and then left without saying anything. Nate checked in once, said nothing, left. That was, in its way, more useful than anything else anyone could have offered. What Lena was doing was not simple. She had 30 years of xenolinguistics. Behind her, 30 years of studying signals. That turned out to be pulsars, gases, magnetic interference, and 3 times. In her career, something that might have been meaningful before the follow-up analysis decided it wasn't. She had the best ears of anyone at Earth's contact agency. She had the best tools. The tools were not built for this. She broke the signal into layers. There were thousands of them, not variations of the same sound. Thousands of separate sources, all transmitting the same core frequencies. At the same time, all overlapping, all folding into each other into one enormous sound. She pulled them apart one by one. She mapped them against every database. She had. The biological distress markers were not subtle. They were not ambiguous. They were the frequencies that every living thing in the known universe, across every species humanity had cataloged, produced under the same conditions. The markers for pain, the markers for fear, the markers for the end of something that was not supposed to end. The signal was a scream. Not one scream. Thousands, layered on top of each other until they became a single sound, until they became the sound that had come through every speaker on the Arden Cross and made Eli forget what he was about to say, and made Kara stop thinking about her bad hand of cards, and made Nate Calloway, who had survived 2 wars and a decompression event, put down his pen and walked very quietly down the corridor. Lena wrote her report. She used clean sentences and correct formatting and numbered subsections. She filed it to Admiral Owen Stryker at Earth Command with a subject line that said unidentified signal, biological distress markers confirmed, source location attached. She sent it. She sat for a while in the signal bay, alone. The coffee Kara had brought was cold. She picked it up and held it. She did not drink it. She thought about 30 years of work. 30 years of telling anyone who would listen that humanity needed to reach outward. That contact, real contact with whatever was out there, would be the most important thing the species ever did. She had said it at conferences. She had written it in papers. She had said it to her students when she still had students, and to journalists who wanted a quote, and to the review board that approved her position on the Arden Cross. She had believed it every time. She played the signal again. Thousands of voices, all transmitting the same thing, all at once, from somewhere out past the edge of the Carina expanse where humanity had not yet gone in any serious numbers. She had been right, she thought. Contact was the most important thing. She just had not known what they would be making contact with. An hour later, Stryker's response came through. She read it. Nate read it over her shoulder. It said, proceed with caution. Do not engage. Observe and report. Nate read it twice. He folded the printed copy once along the middle and set it on the edge of the desk. Noted, he said. He went back to his office. The fuel expenditure report was still there. He looked at it for a long time. Then he pushed it aside and sat very still, in the way a man sits still when something in his chest has started a calculation he has not told his brain about yet. Outside the signal bay window, the stars did not move. The Carina expanse was dark and enormous, and somewhere inside it, thousands of voices had screamed at the same time, and the sound had traveled all the way out here and come through every speaker on a small human ship and made everyone on board stop what they were doing. Lena played it one more time. Then she turned it off and went to find something to eat that was not cold rice. From the floor, the desperate cry for mercy that unleashed humanity's fury. Part 2. What they found. The Arden Cross came out of FTL at the edge of the Solari system, and for a long moment, nobody said anything. Kara was at sensors. She was good at her job in the way that a person is good at a thing when they have done it so long it has become a reflex. She read numbers the way other people read faces. She could pull meaning out of a sensor. Feed the way Lena pulled meaning out of sound. She sat at her station and read the data coming in and did not speak for 40 seconds. Nate watched her. When she spoke, she did not say anything dramatic. She did not describe what she saw in words that would make it feel larger or smaller than it was. She just read the numbers. Ship signatures, energy output readings, mass displacement figures, the count of heat signatures on the largest planetary body in the system. That indicated living things. She read for about 2 minutes. The bridge was very quiet. Eli was the one who finally said, "What does that mean?" Kara looked at him. "It means there used to be a lot more of them." That was all she said. It was enough. They found the first Solari ship 20 minutes later, drifting at the outer edge of the system. It was not a warship. It was something between a transport and a colony vessel built for carrying people from one place to another, not for fighting. It was about half the size of the Arden Cross. 1/3 of its hull was gone. Not damaged. Not torn. Gone. The edges where the hole ended were clean. Smooth the way metal is smooth when it is cut with something very precise, not the way metal is smooth when it breaks. Something had taken a portion of the ship and removed it with the same care that a person removes a slice from a loaf of bread. Nate stared at the sensor image for a moment. "Life signs." 41, Kara said. The ship had been built for 300. Eli got on the comm. He routed to the Solari vessels frequency and started talking. His voice was calm and clear and steady. He did not know if they could understand him. Lena was already working on the language. Eli talked anyway, tone carried across. Better than words, and the tone he was using was the one that meant, "We are here, we see you, come toward us." It took 2 hours to guide the survivors through docking. Eli talked the whole time. His voice did not shake once. When the docking was done and the survivors were being moved to the medical bay, Eli turned his camera off. Nobody asked him why. Nobody needed to. Lena went straight to the medical bay. She had her translation software running in her recorder and a kind of focused look on her face that meant she was going to work until her brain fell out of her head. She sat down in the corner of the medical bay and started learning. 41 Solari. They were roughly the same height as humans with slightly too many joints in their fingers and eyes that were large and pale. They moved carefully, the way people move when they're not sure the floor will hold them. Some of them were injured. All of them were afraid in a way that had settled into their bodies like something old, not something new. One of them, a female, Lena thought, though she was not yet sure how the Solari organized such things, kept moving through the group, touching people lightly on the arm or the shoulder as she passed. She was checking on them. Lena watched her. She had the specific kind of efficiency that came from doing a thing many times. She was a caretaker. She was what she was in the same way. Lena was what she was, all the way down. Nate was still on the bridge when the Varric ship appeared. It came out of nowhere, which was not accurate. It came from the direction of the inner system, which meant it had been in the system the whole time, which was worse. It was enormous. 4 times the size of anything humanity had built and put in space. It sat in the sensor feed like a fact. Kara looked at it for a moment. Then she said, "That is a large ship." Nate said. It did not power weapons. It did not maneuver toward them. It simply appeared and then transmitted. Standard. Clean. Translated into perfect human English by systems that had clearly studied humanity for longer than humanity had known they existed. The message said, "This system is being processed. Your vessel is not a target. Withdraw and you will not be included in the processing." Nate read it. Kara read it. Eli had come back to the bridge by then. He read it. "Processed," Kara said. "Like a form," Eli said. Nobody laughed. It was not funny. It was the absence of something, the thing the message did not have, which was any awareness that what it was describing had weight. People were being processed. A system was being processed. The word was the same word you would use for data or grain or anything else that went in one end of something and came out different on the other side. The Varric had used it without irony, because to them there was no irony in it. Nate opened a channel to Earth Command. He relayed the message. He described the Varric ship. He described the 41 survivors in the medical bay. He described the drifting Solari vessel with the clean-edged hole where 1/3 of it used to be. Then he waited. The orders came back in 11 minutes. They said, "Do not engage. Maintain position. We are assembling a diplomatic response." Nate closed the channel. He looked at Kara, at Eli. He looked at the sensor feed showing the Varric ship, which had not moved, which was simply sitting there the way a thing sits when it is not worried about anything. "Diplomatic response," Kara said. Her voice was completely flat. Nate said. He did not say anything else. Lena had been in the medical bay for 6 hours by the time the Varric ship made its next move. She had learned approximately 300 words of the Solari language. She had learned that the caretaker's name sounded like the moment before. Rain. She had learned that one of the survivors, a male with a burn across one arm that was healing wrong, was a teacher. She had learned that 3 of the youngest survivors kept looking toward the door of the medical bay, not because they wanted to leave, but because it was the direction the sound was coming from. The sound was the Varric ship beginning its next pass through the inner system. It was a low, resonant thing. Not a weapon charging. Not an engine pushing the ship forward. Just the sound of something very large, moving through space at a pace that said, it was not in a hurry. It was not in a hurry because it did not need to be. The 41 Solari survivors heard it. They made the sound, the same sound as the signal that had come through every speaker on the Arden Cross and made Nate put down his pen. The same thousands of layered Frequencies. Not thousands now, 41. But in the small space of the medical bay it was enormous, and it filled the corridor outside, and it came through the walls and into the bridge where Nate and Kara and Eli sat, and all three of them heard it, and none of them spoke. Lena stood in the doorway of the medical bay. She could not fix what was making them make that sound. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. She stood in the doorway and listened, and let herself know, all the way down, exactly what was happening in this system and exactly what Earth commands. 11-minute diplomatic response was worth. She let herself know it. Then she went back in to sit with them. The desperate cry for mercy that unleashed humanity's fury. Part 3. The line. 4 days. Earth Command was assembling. Diplomatic response. The phrase had been used in 3 separate transmissions now, each one worded slightly differently, each one meaning the same thing. Wait. Nate waited. He kept a log. He had always kept one, 11 years of deep space, and the log was the one place where the job felt like it had edges, like it started and stopped in a way that could be written down and closed. Most of the entries were short. Fuel readings, course corrections, maintenance notes, the occasional dry line about Eli's cooking. He made 2 entries during those 4 days that were different from the others. The first one was long. It had vessel counts and energy signatures and an analysis of the Varek ship's movement patterns that was as good as anything Kara had produced, which was saying something. It was the handwriting of a man who had been a soldier for a very long time. Thorough, precise, without feeling. The second one was 11 words long. He read it back to himself once. Then he closed the log. Kara had not slept properly in 3 days. She was running tactical projections on the Varek ship, had been running them since the first day, and the projections kept reaching the same conclusions through 400 different paths. She had a system for deciding when a problem was solved, when all the roads led to the same place. She stopped looking for new roads. She had stopped looking for new roads. She was sitting at her station eating crackers from a bag on the second morning when Eli came and sat next to her. He looked at her screens for a while, without saying anything, which meant he understood at least some of what he was seeing, which meant the situation was even more legible than she had thought. He said, "So the diplomatic response isn't going to?" "No," she said. "Not even if they." "No. What if humanity offered to?" "Eli." She ate a cracker. "I have run 417 scenarios." He looked at her. "And the Varek do not have a word for negotiation." Lena checked. "They have a word for pause. It means temporary cessation before continuation." Eli looked at the sensor feed. The Varek ship sitting in the inner system, not hurrying, not worrying, doing what it came to do. "Oh," he said. It was a very small word for a very large understanding. He went and made coffee. He brought her a cup. The coffee was bad because he always made it bad, and she drank it anyway. Because it was warm, and because he had made it, and because some things did not need to be said. Lena did not leave the medical bay. By the 3rd day she had learned enough of the Solari language to hold a real conversation, which was faster than she had ever learned anything, which told her something about the quality of her focus. When a person needs something enough, the brain finds a way to do what it normally cannot. She had learned the teacher's name. She had learned that the caretaker, the one whose name sounded like the moment before rain, had been the one to transmit the signal, that she had done it on her own, without authority, without permission, because there was nothing left to ask permission from and nowhere left to send anything except outward into the dark, hoping something was there. She had done it without knowing if anything would answer. She had done it because the alternative was not doing it. Lena sat with her on the third afternoon, and they talked slowly, the way two people talk when they are building the bridge between them out of words that neither of them owns yet. The Solari speaker told her things about her people that were not in any report Lena would ever file. She told her about the schools, about what they grew, about what they called the particular light their sun made in the late part of their day, which had no good translation, but landed somewhere near the human word for gold. Lena listened and asked questions and wrote nothing down. She was not working. She was witnessing. There was a difference, and she had known it her whole career, and she had not always chosen correctly between them. She was choosing correctly now. On the fourth day, Nate came to find her. He stood in the doorway of the medical bay and looked at the survivors, some sleeping, some awake, all present in the room in the specific way that people are present when they have run out of places to go. The teacher was working with two of the younger ones on something with small, drawn marks on a piece of paper. Teaching, Lena realized. In the middle of everything, still teaching. Nate watched that for a moment. Then he said to Lena, "What do you need?" She turned and looked at him. He did not look like a man who had been awake too long exactly. He looked like a man whose face had settled into a final position and was done moving. She said, "I need you to stop waiting for Earth command." He was quiet. She looked at the Solari in the room around her, at the teacher, at the young ones, at the speaker who was asleep in the corner with her back against the wall, and her arms crossed over her chest in a posture that was not peace but was the thing a person does when they have learned to rest inside of fear, because fear is not going away. "I spent 30 years, Lena said. Her voice was level. It was not calm. Level and calm are different things, but it was controlled in the way that a person is controlled when the thing underneath is very large, and they have decided not to let it out yet, saying we should reach outward. That contact was the most important thing humanity could do." She looked at the sleeping speaker. "I was not wrong," she said. "I just did not know who we would be reaching toward." Nate did not say anything. He was not the kind of man who said things when there was nothing to add. He stood in the doorway for another moment, then he left. An hour later, Straker called. Straker looked like a man who had also not slept, but he was carrying the additional weight of having to make decisions with information he did not like. He talked about protocol. He talked about precedent. He talked about the weight of what first contact meant, not just for the Solari, but for every future contact humanity would ever have, and how the decisions made in the next 48 hours would shape those contacts for 100 years. Nate listened to all of it. He sat straight in his chair on the bridge and gave Straker his full attention and did not interrupt once. When Straker finished, Nate said, "Admiral, with respect, they do not have 48 hours. Straker said, "Commander, if you engage, you will be." Nate closed the channel. Kara looked at him. Eli looked at him. The bridge was quiet. The sensor feed showed the Varak ship, the inner system, doing what it had been doing for 4 days without hurry, without worry. Nate sat for a moment. He looked at the feed. He thought about the 11 words he had written in his log and not finished. He stood up. "Eli," he said, "get me a firing solution on that ship." Eli turned to his console. His hands were already moving. He had not hesitated. He had not asked a single question. His hands were already moving because they had been ready to move for 4 days. Since the first night he had turned camera off after the docking and sat alone in the corridor for a while before going back to his bunk. Kara pulled up the tactical display and started recalculating without being asked, because she was Kara and the calculation was the thing she was for. Lena in the medical bay felt the change in the ship. Not a sound, not a movement, just the quality of the air. She had been on ships long enough to know when a crew had made a decision. She looked at the speaker, still sleeping against the wall. She did not wake her. Not yet. The desperate for mercy that unleashed humanity's fury. Part 4. Fury. The Arden Cross was not a warship. She had been designed for exploration, for going places nobody had gone and looking carefully and coming back with good data. Her forward cannons were an afterthought, the kind of thing that gets added to an exploration vessel because somebody in committee asks what happens if something goes wrong out there and nobody has a good answer, so they bolt on 2 cannons and call it done. Her shielding was rated for debris and small collisions. She had a crew of 9. The Varak ship was 4 times the size of anything humanity had built and put in space. It had been processing a star system for 4 days without interruption. It had, as far as Kara's analysis could determine, not encountered meaningful resistance in 300 years. Nate hit it with everything the Arden Cross had. The first shot lit up the sensor feed like a small sun. The second one hit before the first one had finished. Kara was already calculating the third before the second landed, adjusting for the Varak ship's movement, which was minimal because it had not yet understood that something was shooting at it. The Varak ship turned. For a long moment, Eli counted it later. Swore it was almost 6 seconds. It did nothing else. It just turned and looked at the Arden Cross the way a very large thing looks at a very small thing that has done something unexpected. "It's looking at us," Eli said. "I know," Nate said. "That's either very good or very bad." "I know," Nate said. The Varak ship transmitted. Clean standard. Perfect translation, same as before. "You are one vessel. You will be processed." Nate read it. He opened a channel and transmitted back 4 words. "We are not alone." Kara glanced at him sideways. He did not look at her. He was watching the sensor feed. She went back to the targeting calculation and did not say what she was thinking, which was she hoped he was right, and that 48 hours was shorter than it had ever been in the history of counting. The Varak ship opened up. What happened to the Arden Cross in the next 9 minutes was not something that Eli talked about afterward. He had talked about many things from his time and space had a way of making hard stories sound almost funny, a skill he had developed early and refined carefully. He did not develop a way to tell the story of those 9 minutes. He just did not tell it. Kara held the tactical display together with the focused intensity of a person for whom falling apart is simply not an available option. She rerouted power 3 times. She found 2 shielding configurations that the ship's designers had not intended, but that worked better than the intended ones. She kept talking numbers, readings, adjustments in a voice so level that Nate used it to calibrate his own. Eli fired every time she told him to fire. He did not miss. The Arden Cross was not a warship. She was also not stopping. In the medical bay, the Solari survivors felt what was happening. The ship shook and the lights flickered, and one of the younger ones made a sound that the others answered immediately. The way a flock of birds answers a single call. Lena sat among them and kept her voice steady and talked in Solari, badly, but the effort itself was the thing, and they looked at her with their large, pale eyes and stayed calm in the specific way that people stay calm when someone else is choosing to be calm for them. The speaker was awake now. She sat against the wall and watched Lena and did not ask what was happening outside. She already knew. She knew from the way the ship moved and the way Lena sat, something was fighting back. She had not thought she would live to see that. On the bridge, Nate watched the Verac ship and waited. The transmission came at the 8-minute mark. Still clean standard. Still perfectly translated. This is not a productive action. You cannot damage this vessel sufficiently to alter its function. Withdraw. Nate thought about that for a moment. Then he transmitted back. We are not trying to damage you sufficiently. We are keeping you busy. There was a pause. 6 seconds, Kara timed it. Then the Verac ship's power output changed. Not toward the Arden Cross. Away from it. Toward the edge of the system. They're scanning, Kara said. Nate said. They're looking for. The first human ship dropped out of FTL. Then 4 more. Then, from the opposite side of the System 9, Straker's flagship came out last, at the center of the formation, its hull painted with the kind of light that very large engines make when they have been pushed very hard for a very short time. Straker had gotten Nate's transmission about the Verac before Nate had closed the channel. He had also, in the 11 minutes before sending the orders to hold, watched the complete sensor logs from the Arden Cross, the footage from the medical bay, the 41 survivors, the teacher with the paper and the drawn marks. He had sat in his chair for a long moment. Then he had stood up and said, all ship's combat speed. His navigation officer had started to say something about orders. Straker had said, our orders were written before I watched what that thing did to a planet. Nobody had argued. 22 ships. Then 14 more. Then 9 from the far side. 45 human ships coming out of FTL in a ring around a Verac consensus vessel that had not encountered meaningful resistance in 300 years of processing. The Verac ship stopped firing at the Arden Cross. It transmitted. Still standard. Still translated. But the transmission was shorter this time. What is this? Nate read it. It was not phrased as a question. The Varak did not ask questions. Lena had told him. They made statements and waited for correction or confirmation. This was their version of a question. A blank space where understanding should be. Nate transmitted back. This is what answers the signal. There was pause. Longer this time. Kara watched the Varak ship's power. Readings shift. She watched them shift again. She watched them reach a configuration she had not seen in 4 days of watching. They're going to run, she said. Her voice was completely flat, stating a fact. I know, Nate said. Should we? Yes. The Varak ship turned. It pushed toward the edge of the system, at a speed that its size should not have allowed. Streaker's fleet moved to intercept. 3 of his ships were faster. They cut the angle. The Varak ship adjusted. There was a moment. Nate watched it in. The sensor feed, the geometry of it, the way a chase looked from far away, where the outcome was genuinely uncertain. Then it was not. The Varak ship found the gap in the intercept line and pushed through it and was gone. The system was quiet. Eli let out a breath that he had been holding for approximately 9 minutes, and said a word that Nate pretended not to hear. Kara sat back in her chair and ate the last cracker in her bag. She had been holding it since before the shooting started. Streaker's voice came through on the open channel. Calloway. Admiral, Nate said. A pause. You look like hell. I've had 4 days. Another pause. The Solari survivors. 41. Stable. Lena's with them. Silence. Long enough that Nate wondered if the channel had dropped. Then Streaker said, good. Just that. Good. The word of a man who had watched footage from a medical bay and pushed his fleet to combat speed and said nothing diplomatic for the past 48 hours. Nate looked at the sensor feed. The Solari system. What was left of it? We pursue, he said. Not to Streaker. To Kara. She was already recalculating. In the medical bay, the ship had gone. Still, the flickering lights had steadied. The sounds from outside, the sounds that had told the Solari survivors something was happening, had stopped. The speaker looked at Lena. Lena looked back. She did not have the words yet. She was still learning. But some things did not need words, and the speaker had spent long enough reading faces. Human faces were different. The geometry was wrong in places to understand what Lena's face was saying. She reached out and took Lena's hand. Neither of them said anything. Outside, 45 human ships turned toward the edge of the system and started moving. The desperate Mercy that unleashed humanity's fury. Part 5. What fury leaves behind. The war took 4 years. This is not the story of those 4 years. The battles exist in records, in Kara's tactical logs and Streaker's formal reports, in the kind of dense military documentation that gets filed in places most people never look. The Varak were large and fast and had 3 centuries of experience processing systems without resistance. They were not, it turned out, experienced at being hunted. Humanity was very experienced at being hunted. It had been hunted by disease and drought and cold in its own worst choices for all of recorded history. It knew how to survive a thing that was bigger and faster and did not seem to have any particular feeling about the matter. It had been surviving those things since. Before it had words for them. The Varric had not anticipated that. Nobody had told them. This is the story of what came after. Nate was standing in a field outside the city on a cool morning 4 years later. When the memorial was finished. It was not a large ceremony. There had been larger ones, the big public events with speeches and cameras, and the particular kind of solemnity that gets performed in front of crowds. This was smaller. Just the people who had been there. The field had trees in it now. One for every human ship lost in the 4 years of what Earth called, in official documents, the care of conflict. The trees were young. They were thin and small in the way that new things are thin and small, and in 30 years they would be enormous, and in 100 years people would walk between them and not know what they were standing in. Nate knew. He did not count the trees. He already knew the number. He had known it since the day the last count was filed and somebody sent it to him as part of a formal report in a table with the number formatted in bold. Because whoever wrote the report thought that was appropriate. He stood in the field for a long time. He was older than he had been in the way. That was not about years. His face had the same settled quality it had developed on the bridge of the Arden. Crossed that 4th day when he had closed the channel on Streaker and turned to Eli. He did not feel like a hero. He had never felt like a hero. He felt like a man who had made a decision with the information available, and then lived inside the consequences of the decision for 4 years, which was a different thing. He left before the speeches started. He was getting good at that. Kara was teaching at the academy now. She had not expected to end up there. She had expected to keep going, more ships, more sensor feeds, more crackers, eaten at odd hours in the company of bad coffee and tactical problems that did not have good answers. But the academy had asked, and Streaker had suggested it, and she had found, to her own mild surprise, that she was very good at it. She taught tactical analysis. She was known for a particular approach. On the first day of every term, she did not introduce herself. She did not explain what the class would cover. She put one image on the screen at the front of the room and let the cadets look at it. The image was a sensor reading the Arden Cross alone in the Solari system, firing on a ship 4 times its size. She let them look for about 30 seconds. Long enough for the scale to land. Long enough for someone to notice the numbers in the corner of the reading. The Varric ship's mass, the Arden Cross's mass, the gap between them. Then she said, "Any questions?" They always had the same first question. Some version of why. Why did the ship engage? Why did they not wait for backup? Why did one exploration vessel open fire on something that size? She always gave the same answer. Because nobody else was going to. She let that sit. Then she started the lesson. Eli was not at the memorial. He had been invited. He had said he would think about it, and then not gone, which was its own kind of answer. He lived in a small city now, not on a ship, which had taken adjustment. He made good coffee, genuinely good, which was a change from the bad coffee he had made on the Arden Cross, and he thought about that sometimes. He had learned to do it properly. Some things you learned when you had time, and he had time now. He did not talk about the war much. He had talked about many hard things in his life and found ways to make them almost bearable through the telling, but Those 9 minutes on the bridge of the Arden Cross while the Varric ship opened. Up in Kara read numbers, and he fired. Every time she said fire, that stayed where it was. Untold. He did not need to tell it. He had been there. Some mornings he woke up and it was all right immediately. He had gotten good at noticing that. He held onto those mornings. Lena was the one who spoke at the bigger ceremonies. She had not expected that either. She had spent her career as the person who filed papers and attended conferences and made arguments to people who nodded and did not change their policies. She was now somehow the foremost xenolinguist in human history and the closest thing the situation had to a public face because she had been there at the beginning and she had the specific ability to say difficult things in plain language. She went to most of the speaking engagements. She said the same thing at each one, in different arrangements, in different rooms to different groups of people who all needed to hear it. We did not know what we were, she said. I spent my career arguing that humanity should reach outward. I was right about that. But here is what I did not understand. A pause. She had learned pauses from 30 years of listening. We are not dangerous because we are violent. Every species that has achieved space travel has violence in its history. The Varric were violent. Violence alone is not the thing. She looked at whatever room she was in. We are dangerous because we will cross 40 light years in an underpowered exploration vessel against orders for 41 people we have never met. Because one of us will talk those 41 people through a docking procedure for 2 hours in a language we do not speak, and not let his voice shake once. Because another one of us will spend 4 days running 400 scenarios and then hand the results to the person making the decision without being asked. The Varric processed 300 star systems over 3 centuries. They stopped when they ran into the species that had already been through everything they could do to us. Plague, war, collapse, the end of things. We had been through all of it, and survived, and remembered, and refused to watch it happen to someone else. The last pause was the longest. That is what they miscalculated. They heard the signal. They did not know what kind of species answers it. It was a good line. She did not feel good when she said it. She felt accurate, which was different. The transmission from the Solari came 14 months after the end of the war. It came to Lena's personal address, not through any official channel. It was not a diplomatic communication. It had no formal headers. It was a recording. A Solari village. Small. Rebuilt in the way that things are. Rebuilt when the people doing the rebuilding have to start with almost nothing and work forward from there. The structures were new, the edges clean. The material slightly different from the old ones that still stood around them. The light of their sun came through the windows in a way that Lena recognized. She had heard about this light. The speaker had tried to describe it to her once, the particular quality of it. In the late part of their day, she had not been able to picture it. Then, she could now. There were children outside, playing in the way that children play, with the total commitment of people who have not yet learned to hold anything back. A teacher was watching them. Not the teacher from the medical bay. A different one. But a teacher. The speaker's voice came over the recording. Her Solari was clear and steady. Lena's translation was much better now. For years of work in a language that she would spend the rest of her life learning, she got all of it. It meant you answered. We remember. Lena watched the children play for a long time. The recording was 4 minutes long and she watched all of it and then played it. Again. And again. She did not write back. Not yet. She was looking for words that were the right size for what she wanted to say. And the right words were not there yet. And she had learned 30 years of listening, 4 years of war, one morning. In a medical bay holding a hand that was not shaped like a human hand, that some things should not be said until you had the right words for them. She saved the recording. She played it again. Outside, the sun was doing what it does. At that part of the day, the light came through the window in a way that was not the same as what the speaker had described. A different sun, a different window, a different world mostly intact. Mostly. She sat with the light for a while. Then she opened a blank document and began to look for the words.